The mare's labored breathing echoed through the narrow canyon as Beatrice Owens urged her forward, knowing that if they didn't reach Rock Springs, Wyoming, before nightfall, her 3 children might not survive another cold November night without proper shelter. The year was 1878, and the frontier was no place for a widow traveling alone with young ones. But desperation had driven her westward after her husband Thomas had died from fever 6 months prior, leaving nothing but debts and disappointed relatives who had made their opinions clear about her prospects. "Mama, I'm so tired," whispered 7-year-old Sarah from behind her, clutching her younger brother Daniel, who had just turned 5 last month. "I know, sweetheart. Just a little further now," Beatrice said, though her own exhaustion threatened to pull her from the saddle. Her eldest, 9-year-old Michael, rode silently beside them on their aging gelding, trying so hard to be the man of the family now, though she could see the fear in his eyes whenever he thought she wasn't looking. Thomas's brother had been brutally honest when she'd asked for help. "No man's going to want you with all that burden, Beatrice. 3 mouths to feed that aren't his own. You're dreaming if you think you'll find anyone willing to take that on." His wife had nodded in agreement, arms crossed over her ample chest. "Best thing would be to find homes for them separately. Then maybe you'd have a chance at a decent future." The memory still burned like acid in her throat. She'd taken what little she had and left Pennsylvania that very week, heading toward her late mother's cousin in Wyoming who'd written years ago about opportunities in the growing town of Rock Springs. The letter was 5 years old now, and Beatrice had no way of knowing if the woman was even still alive, but she'd had nowhere else to turn. The sun was dipping behind the mountains when they finally crested the ridge and saw Rock Springs spread out below them in the valley. It wasn't much, just a cluster of wooden buildings along the railroad tracks that had brought the coal mining industry to this harsh landscape, but to Beatrice it looked like salvation. Smoke rose from chimneys, promising warmth. Lamplight glowed in windows, promising shelter. "Look, children." "We made it," she said, and felt tears slip down her dusty cheeks. They rode slowly down the main street as curious faces turned to watch them. Beatrice felt every stare like a weight. She knew what they saw. A gaunt woman in a worn traveling dress, 3 thin children, horses that should have been put to pasture years ago. The kind of desperate poverty that made people look away quickly, afraid it might be contagious. She stopped at the general store, her throat dry as dust. A portly man with mutton chops stood behind the counter, eyeing them with obvious suspicion. "I'm looking for Constance Harper. She wrote to my mother some years back, said she lived here in Rock Springs. I'm her cousin's daughter, Beatrice Owens." The man's expression shifted to something almost like pity. "Constance passed on 2 winters ago. Pneumonia took her quick." Beatrice felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She steadied herself against the counter, aware of her children watching her, waiting for her to fix this like she always somehow managed to fix things. "I see. Thank you," she managed to say. "Is there a boarding house in town?" "There is, but Widow Fletcher don't take children." "Too much noise and mess," she says. He scratched his chin. "There's rooms above the Lucky Dollar Saloon, but that's no place for young ones either." "Surely there must be somewhere you got money for room and board," he interrupted, not unkindly but practical. Beatrice reached into her pocket and pulled out the small leather purse that contained everything left in the world to her name. She counted out the coins onto the counter with trembling fingers. "I have $14.30, and I can work. I can cook, clean, tend gardens. I'm a hard worker, sir, and my children are well behaved." The storekeeper's face softened further. "Look, I don't mean to be harsh, but times are hard here too. Most folks can barely feed their own." The mining company hires men for the coal pits, but there's not much call for women's work beyond the usual household duties. Each family tends to themselves. A woman browsing the dry goods nearby had been listening. She approached, her fine wool dress and carefully styled hair marking her as someone of means in this rough town. "You're a widow, then?" "Yes, madam. 6 months now. My husband died of fever." The woman's eyes traveled over the children with an expression Beatrice had come to recognize. The cold calculation of someone deciding whether to help or turn away. 3 children is a heavy burden for a woman alone. Have you no family to take them? "They're not a burden, madam. They're my children, and we stay together." Beatrice straightened her spine despite her exhaustion. "Pride won't keep them fed through winter," the woman said coolly. "The charitable thing would be to find proper homes for them where they'd have 2 parents and full bellies. The church in Laramie has connections with families looking to adopt." "No." The word came out harder than Beatrice intended. "We stay together." The woman sniffed and returned to her shopping. The storekeeper looked uncomfortable. "There's an old prospector's cabin about 2 miles north of town. Been abandoned for a year or so since old Gus died. It's not much, but it's got 4 walls and a roof. Might leak some and you'd need to fix up the chimney, but it'd be shelter at least. No one would bother you there. Can you tell me how to find it?" He gave her directions, and Beatrice thanked him, then purchased a small bag of cornmeal, some dried beans, and a few strips of bacon, watching her precious dollars diminish. The children remained silent as they remounted and rode back out of town following the storekeeper's instructions. The cabin was worse than she'd feared. The door hung crooked on its hinges, one window was broken out entirely, and the smell of animal habitation was strong. But it was shelter, and beggars couldn't be choosers. They spent the last hour of daylight sweeping out debris and mouse droppings, stuffing rags in the broken window, and getting a small fire going in the stone fireplace after Beatrice climbed up and cleared a bird's nest from the chimney. That night, they ate a thin corn porridge and huddled together under their 2 blankets near the fire. Beatrice listened to her children's breathing slowly even out into sleep, and allowed herself to cry silently, wondering what would become of them, how she'd survive the winter, whether she'd made a terrible mistake bringing them to this unforgiving place. When morning came, she forced herself up and began making a list in her mind of everything that needed doing. The cabin required extensive repairs. She needed more supplies. Most importantly, she needed work. After feeding the children the last of the cornmeal, she left Michael in charge with strict instructions to keep his siblings inside and safe, then rode back into town on their better horse. Rock Springs was busier in the morning light. Miners headed toward the coal pits on the edge of town, their faces already smudged with the black dust that seemed to coat everything. Women swept stoops and carried water from the town well. Beatrice stopped at several houses, knocking on doors and asking if anyone needed help with washing, cleaning, or mending. Most turned her away politely. A few offered a day's work here and there, but nothing steady. By noon she was discouraged but determined not to show it. She stopped at the town well to water her horse and fill the canteen, aware of the other women drawing water who stopped their conversations to stare at her. "That's the widow with all those children," one whispered, not quite quietly enough. "Showed up yesterday with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Poor thing. But what did she expect, coming here with no prospects? Someone should tell her plain that no man's going to take on a ready-made family. Best she could hope for is finding work as a housekeeper somewhere, but who'd hire her with 3 little ones in tow?" Beatrice kept her eyes down and said nothing, focusing on the simple task of working the pump handle, but each word landed like a stone in her chest. because they were only saying what she'd already been told. What she already feared was true. She was securing the canteen to her saddle when she heard a commotion down the street. A massive draft horse had broken free from its hitching post and was rearing and bucking, scattering people in all directions. A young boy, perhaps 10 years old, had frozen in fear directly in the animal's path. Without thinking, Beatrice ran toward the child, reaching him just as the horse's hooves came down. She grabbed the boy and pulled him aside, stumbling but keeping them both upright as the terrified animal thundered past. "Are you all right?" she asked, checking the boy for injuries. "Yes, madam." "Thank you, madam." His eyes were wide with shock. A tall man came running up, his face tight with concern. "Robert, are you hurt, son?" "No, Pa, she saved me." The boy pointed at Beatrice. The man turned to her, and Beatrice found herself looking up into a weathered but kind face, dark eyes that held genuine gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite identify. He was probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that needed cutting and the rough clothing of someone who worked with his hands. There was a quietness about him, a steadiness that reminded her of deep water. "I'm grateful to you, madam. That horse might have killed him." He placed his hands on his son's shoulders, pulling him close for a moment. "That was brave, what you did." "Any mother would have done the same," Beatrice said. "I'm just glad he's unharmed." "You're the widow who came to town yesterday," he said, and it wasn't a question. In a town this size, everyone knew everyone else's business within hours. Yes, Beatrice Owens. She felt suddenly self-conscious about her dusty dress and wind-blown hair. "Yates Anderson, this is my son, Robert." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she shook it. His grip was firm but gentle, calloused from work. "I heard you were asking around for work." "I am. I can do most anything that needs doing. I'm staying in the old prospector's cabin north of town with my 3 children." "That place is barely standing," he said, frowning. "No place for kids, especially heading into winter." "It's what we have," she said, lifting her chin. Yates studied her for a long moment. "My wife died 3 years back, childbirth. The baby didn't make it either." His voice was matter of fact, but she could hear the old pain underneath. "I've been managing on my own with Robert, but I'll be honest, my house is a disaster and I'm not much of a cook. Beans and bacon is about the extent of my skills. Robert here can tell you he's tired of it." "I am, Pa," the boy said earnestly. "I'd about give anything for some decent biscuits again." Despite everything, Beatrice felt a smile tug at her lips. "I make good biscuits. I own a small ranch about 3 miles east of town," Yates continued. "Nothing fancy, but I've got cattle and horses, do some breaking and training for extra money. The house has 3 bedrooms. Robert and I only use 2. I could use help with cooking and mending and keeping the place livable. In exchange, you and your children would have a roof over your heads and food to eat. I'd pay you a fair wage, too, $20 a month." Beatrice's heart leaped, but caution made her hesitate. "That's generous, Mr. Anderson, but people will talk. A widow and a widower under the same roof." "People always talk," he said simply. "But I'm offering you honest work for honest pay and a safe place for your kids. You'd have your own room, and I'd expect nothing but what I said: cooking, cleaning, mending. I'm not looking for anything else." There was something in his eyes that made her believe him, a decency that she hadn't seen in many men. Still, she had to be practical. "I'd need to bring my children to meet your son first. If they don't get along, it wouldn't work." "Fair enough. Why don't you bring them by tomorrow? Give you time to think on it and us time to clean up a bit so we don't scare you off entirely." He gave her a small smile, the first she'd seen from him, and it transformed his serious face into something approaching handsome. "Tomorrow, then," she agreed. That evening, after another meager meal, Beatrice told her children about Mr. Anderson's offer. Michael was suspicious immediately. Why would he want to help us? Men don't just do nice things for nothing. He needs help and we need a place to stay. It's a fair exchange, Beatrice said, though she understood her son's wariness. He'd heard his uncle's harsh words too. Will there be other children? Sarah asked hopefully. I miss having friends. He has a son about your age, Michael. 10 years old. His name is Robert. Daniel, her youngest, was simply excited about the prospect of regular meals and a warm bed. His enthusiasm was infectious, and even Michael's suspicion couldn't entirely dampen it. The next morning they rode out to the Anderson ranch. It sat in a pretty valley with a creek running through it, the house a solid-looking structure of timber with a covered porch. Corrals held several horses, and cattle grazed in the distance. It looked like prosperity compared to the desperate poverty they'd been living in. Yates and Robert came out to meet them. Beatrice watched carefully as the children were introduced. Robert seemed shy at first, but when Sarah complimented his horse, he lit up and began talking about the animals on the ranch. Within minutes, the 4 children were chattering together, and Beatrice felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Come see the house," Yates said quietly. "I warn you, it's a bachelor's establishment. We've let things go." He wasn't exaggerating. The house was clean enough structurally, but dust coated every surface. Dishes were piled in the kitchen, and the living area looked like a strong wind had blown through it. But the bones of it were good. A solid structure, real glass windows, a large kitchen with a good stove, and 3 bedrooms as promised. "The room here would be yours and your daughter's," he said, opening a door to a spacious room with a large bed and a smaller one. "Your boys could share the other spare room. It's got 2 beds already. Robert's room is there, and mine is at the end of the hall. It's more than we've had in a long time," Beatrice said honestly. The room was dusty and clearly unused, but it had real beds with real mattresses, and she could already imagine Sarah safely tucked under a warm quilt. "There's something else," Yates said, and she heard hesitation in his voice. "I need you to know upfront that I'm not looking for a new wife. I loved my Mary, and when she died, something in me died too. I'm not saying that to be dramatic, just to be clear about what this is. You'd be my housekeeper, nothing more, and I'd treat you with complete respect. Your children would be safe here. But I don't want you thinking this might become something it won't." His bluntness was startling, but also oddly reassuring. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Anderson. I'm not looking for a husband either. My Thomas was a good man, and I'm not interested in replacing him. I just need to keep my children safe and fed. Then we understand each other. When can you start?" "Today, if that suits you." It took 2 trips to bring their meager belongings from the cabin to the ranch. The children helped carry things in, their excitement palpable. Beatrice spent the rest of the day cleaning the kitchen and preparing a proper supper. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans she found in the root cellar, and biscuits with butter and honey. When she called everyone to the table, she saw tears in Robert's eyes as he looked at the spread. "It's like Ma used to make," he whispered. Yates's expression was carefully neutral, but she saw him swallow hard. "Let's say grace," he said quietly, and they all bowed their heads. The meal was eaten with the enthusiastic appreciation of people who'd been living on meager rations. Even Michael seemed to relax slightly, and Sarah and Daniel were practically glowing with happiness. After supper, Yates helped her with the dishes while the children played outside under Robert's supervision. They worked in companionable silence for a while before he spoke. "I heard what some of the women in town said to you, about your children being a burden." Beatrice's hands stilled in the wash water. "Word travels fast. Small town. People don't have enough of their own business to mind." He dried a plate with more force than necessary. "For what it's worth, I think they're wrong. Your kids seem like good children, polite, well-behaved. You've done well by them." Something in her chest loosened at those words. "Thank you, they're everything to me." "I can see that." He paused. "Robert's been lonely." "I've done my best, but a boy needs more than just his father. Having other children around, it's good for him. So this arrangement, it's not charity. You're helping me as much as I'm helping you." Over the following weeks, they settled into a routine. Beatrice rose early to prepare breakfast for everyone before Yates headed out to tend the cattle and horses. She spent her days cooking, cleaning, mending, and caring for the house that slowly transformed under her attention. The children attended the small schoolhouse in town, riding together each morning on one of Yates's gentler horses. Yates was true to his word. He was respectful, polite, and kept a proper distance. They'd exchange pleasantries at meals, discuss household needs, and occasionally talk about the children, but nothing more personal. It was a business arrangement, and both of them maintained those boundaries carefully. But Beatrice found herself noticing small things about him. The way he always thanked her for meals, even simple ones. How he'd patiently teach Michael and Daniel about caring for the horses on weekends. The quiet competence with which he handled his work, never complaining despite long days. And especially the way he was with Robert, firm when needed but always kind, always present. One evening in early December, a storm rolled in unexpectedly while the men were out checking on some cattle in the far pasture. Beatrice had supper ready and waiting as the hours stretched on and darkness fell. The children grew worried, particularly Robert, who knew the dangers of winter storms. "Pa knows these lands," Robert said, trying to sound confident. "He'll be all right." But Beatrice could see the fear in his eyes. She kept the children occupied with games and stories, even as her own worry grew. It was nearly 9 o'clock when they finally heard horses outside. Yates and Michael came in, both covered in snow and shivering. "Sorry we're so late," Yates said. "We had to bring the cattle down from the high pasture. Storm came up faster than expected." Beatrice immediately went into action, getting them both near the fire, bringing warm blankets and hot coffee. As she helped Michael out of his wet coat, she noticed Yates watching her with an odd expression. "Michael did well out there today," he said. "Handled himself like a man. You should be proud." Her son stood a little straighter at the praise. "Mr. Anderson taught me how to read the weather signs. I saw the clouds changing and told him." "That he did. Sharp eye." Yates smiled at the boy, and Michael actually smiled back. After the children had gone to bed, Beatrice reheated the stew and sat with Yates while he ate. He was exhausted, she could see it in the lines around his eyes, but he'd made sure Michael was warm and safe before seeing to his own needs. "You didn't have to take him with you," she said quietly. "He's only 9. He wanted to learn. And boys that age, they need to feel useful, capable. After what he's been through, losing his father, having to be strong for his family, I figured he could use something to be proud of." He met her eyes. "I hope that was all right." "It was more than all right, thank you." She hesitated. "He's been so angry since Thomas died." "Angry at the world, at God, at me sometimes for bringing them here. Today is the first time I've seen him really smile in months. He's a good boy, they all are." Yates pushed his empty bowl away. "I meant what I said that first day. Your children aren't a burden, Beatrice. They're good kids, and they've made this place feel like a home again. Robert's happier than I've seen him since his mother died. Sarah makes him laugh with her stories, and Daniel follows him around like a puppy, which he loves. Even Michael, for all his wariness, is teaching Robert things from those books he reads. This has been good for all of us." The way he said her name, gentle and warm, made something flutter in her chest. She pushed the feeling away firmly. I should let you rest. Tomorrow's another early day. As winter deepened, the household grew closer. Christmas came, and though none of them had much money for gifts, they made decorations from pine boughs and berries. Beatrice baked special treats with the children, and Yates carved small wooden animals for each child, his calloused hands creating surprisingly delicate work. On Christmas Eve, they all sat around the fireplace, and Yates read the Nativity story from the family Bible. His voice was deep and steady, and when he finished, Sarah asked if they could sing carols. They went through all the ones they knew, their voices blending together in the warm room. "This is the best Christmas I've had in years," Robert said sleepily, leaning against his father. "Me too," Sarah agreed, and Daniel nodded enthusiastically. Even Michael, ever cautious with his feelings, admitted, "It's been nice." After the children were in bed, Beatrice and Yates sat together in the living room, listening to the wind howl outside while the fire crackled warmly. "Thank you for this," Beatrice said softly, "for giving us not just shelter but a real home, for treating my children with such kindness." "Thank you for bringing life back to this place," Yates responded, "for making it feel less empty." He paused, staring into the fire. "When Mary died, I thought I'd just go through the motions for Robert's sake until he was grown. Then I'd figure out what to do with myself. But having you all here, hearing laughter in this house again, it's reminded me that life keeps going, whether we're ready for it or not. It's hard, isn't it? Moving forward when part of you is still standing at the grave." "Yes." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw her own grief and healing reflected in his eyes. "But I'm learning that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It just means accepting that there's still life to be lived." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken understanding before Beatrice stood. "I should get to bed. Morning comes early." "Beatrice," he said as she reached the doorway, "I'm glad you came to Rock Springs. Glad you didn't give up." "So am I," she said, and meant it. The new year of 1879 brought deep snows and bitter cold. The household stayed warm and well-fed, though there were days when the wind was too fierce for anyone to venture far from the house. On those days, Yates would work on tack repair and other indoor tasks, while Beatrice taught all the children their letters and numbers at the kitchen table. She discovered that Yates, despite his limited formal education, was intelligent and well-read. He had a small collection of books that he'd return to over and over, and sometimes in the evenings he'd read aloud while she mended or knitted. His voice was soothing, and she found herself looking forward to those quiet times together. One snowy afternoon, Beatrice was in the kitchen preparing bread when she heard angry voices from outside. Looking through the window, she saw two rough-looking men on horseback talking to Yates by the barn. Something about their posture made her nervous. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch. "Everything all right?" she called out. "Fine," Yates said, but his voice was tight. "Just some fellows passing through." One of the men, a heavy-set brute with a scarred face, looked at her with undisguised interest that made her skin crawl. "Mighty pretty housekeeper you got there, Anderson. Didn't know widows came so handsome." "Time for you to move along," Yates said, his voice cold in a way Beatrice had never heard before. "We're just being friendly," the other man said, smaller but with mean eyes. "Heard in town you got yourself a ready-made family here, 4 kids. That's a lot of mouths to feed for a woman who ain't even your wife. My arrangements are none of your concern. Now get off my property." The first man grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Or what? You gonna take on both of us?" Yates's hand moved to rest on the rifle he'd carried out with him. I'm not looking for trouble, but I won't have you bothering my household. This is your last chance to leave peacefully." The men exchanged glances, clearly calculating their chances. Whatever they saw in Yates's face made them decide against pushing further. "We're going. But you might want to make an honest woman of her, Anderson. Folks are talking, saying it ain't proper, the arrangement you got." After they rode off, Yates came to the porch. "I'm sorry about that. Drifters looking to cause trouble. Are people really talking?" Beatrice asked, though she knew they were. She'd felt the stares and heard the whispers on the rare occasions she went to town. Some. But the ones whose opinions matter know there's nothing improper happening here. He met her eyes. "Unless you want to leave. If this arrangement is causing you trouble or distress, I'd understand." "Where would we go? Back to that falling down cabin?" "No." She straightened her spine. "I've done nothing wrong and neither have you. Let them talk." But that night, lying in bed with Sarah sleeping peacefully beside her, Beatrice couldn't help worrying. What if the gossip got worse? What if it affected the children? Sarah and Daniel seemed happy and had made friends at school, but she'd noticed Michael coming home with a black eye last week, though he'd refused to talk about it. The next Sunday, Yates surprised them all by announcing they'd be attending church in town. They'd gone a few times before, but not regularly. Beatrice understood what he was doing, showing the community that they were a respectable household, nothing to whisper about. They arrived at the small white church, and Beatrice felt every eye turn toward them as they entered. Yates led them to a pew near the front, his bearing calm and confident. Robert sat beside him, then the other children, with Beatrice on the end. To anyone watching, they looked like a family. After the service, the minister, Reverend Thompson, approached them. He was an elderly man with kind eyes. "Good to see you here, Yates, and Mrs. Owens. Your children are doing wonderfully in school from what I hear. Mrs. Henderson says Sarah has a real gift for reading." "Thank you, Reverend," Beatrice said, relieved at the warm welcome. "I wonder if I might have a word with you both." The Reverend gestured to a quieter corner of the churchyard. When they'd stepped away from the crowd, he spoke gently. "I want you to know that I think what you're doing is admirable. You've provided for each other in a way that's practical and decent. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that some folks in town are concerned about the propriety of the arrangement." "We've done nothing improper," Yates said firmly. "I believe you. But appearances matter, particularly for the children's sake. They don't deserve to be the subject of gossip." He paused. "Have you considered making the arrangement permanent? A marriage of convenience would silence the talk and provide security for everyone involved." Beatrice felt her face flush. "That's not something we've discussed. I'm not suggesting you rush into anything. I'm simply saying that sometimes the practical choice is also the wise one." He nodded to them both. "Think on it. My door is always open if you want to talk further." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, the children chattering among themselves while Beatrice and Yates sat in uncomfortable silence. Once home, the children scattered to their various activities while Beatrice began preparing Sunday dinner. Yates lingered in the kitchen, unusual for him. "About what the Reverend said, you don't need to explain anything," Beatrice interrupted, keeping her eyes on the potatoes she was peeling. "I know you're not interested in remarrying. You've been clear about that. I want to be fair to you and your children. If the gossip gets worse, if it causes problems for them at school or in town, then we'll deal with it." She set down the knife and finally looked at him. "I won't trap you into a marriage you don't want, Yates. You've been kinder to us than anyone had a right to expect. I won't repay that by manipulating you into something more." He studied her face for a long moment. "You're a remarkable woman, Beatrice Owens. Any man would be lucky to have you, children and all. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. "That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness. It's truth." He picked up his hat, turning it in his hands. "I need to check on the stock. We'll talk more later." But they didn't talk more. The subject hung between them, unspoken but present, as winter slowly gave way to early spring. The children continued to thrive, and the household ran smoothly. But Beatrice found herself increasingly aware of Yates in ways that made her uncomfortable. She noticed how he'd smile when Sarah showed him a drawing from school, the pride in his voice when Michael successfully gentled a skittish horse, the patience with which he answered Daniel's endless questions. She noticed his hands, strong and capable, and found herself thinking about how safe she'd felt that day when those drifters had come, knowing he'd protect them all. These weren't the thoughts of a housekeeper for her employer. These were the thoughts of a woman attracted to a man, and she couldn't allow them. He'd been clear about not wanting a wife, and she'd promised herself she wasn't looking for a husband. It was dangerous territory. But her heart didn't seem to care about the boundaries they'd so carefully established. One evening in late March, a letter arrived for Beatrice from Pennsylvania. It was from Thomas's brother, and her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a brief note and a bank draft for $300. "The house finally sold," the letter read. "After settling the debts, this is your share. I hope you've come to your senses about the children by now and found proper homes for them. If not, this should at least keep you fed for a while. Don't expect more from us." Beatrice stared at the money. $300 was a fortune, enough to start over somewhere if she chose, enough to be independent, to not rely on Yates's charity any longer. "Good news?" Yates asked, coming in from the barn. "The house in Pennsylvania sold. Thomas's brother sent my share." She showed him the draft. His face was unreadable. "That's wonderful. That's real security for you and the children." "Yes." She folded the letter carefully. "I should probably start looking for a place of our own in town. With this money, I could rent a proper house, maybe start a dressmaking business. I've been imposing on your hospitality for months now." "You haven't been imposing. This was an arrangement that benefited both of us." His voice was careful, neutral. "But if you want to be independent, I understand. You should do what's best for your family." That night, Beatrice lay awake thinking about what she wanted. The practical thing would be to use the money to establish independence. She could find a house in Rock Springs, set up a business, give her children stability without depending on anyone's charity or risking anyone's reputation. But when she imagined leaving the ranch, leaving this life they'd built, her chest ached. Not because of the house or the security, she realized, but because of Yates. Somewhere along the way, despite her best intentions, she'd fallen in love with him, with his quiet strength and gentle ways, with how he treated her children like they mattered, with the man he was when he thought no one was watching, reading to Robert before bed, helping Michael with his schoolwork, playing tea party with Sarah, teaching Daniel to whistle. She'd fallen in love with a man who'd been clear he didn't want her love, who was still grieving his first wife, who'd offered her employment and nothing more. It was a terrible situation, and the only sensible thing to do was leave before she made a fool of herself or ruined what they had. The next morning at breakfast, she announced her decision. "I've thought about it, and I believe it would be best if I found a place in town. The money from the house sale will allow me to establish a proper home for the children." Michael looked stricken. "But I like it here." "Me too," Sarah said, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't want to leave." "Can't we stay, Ma?" Daniel asked. Even Robert looked upset. "Pa, they can't go. Tell them they can stay." Yates's face was carefully blank. "That's your mother's decision, Robert. If Mrs. Owens thinks it's best for her family to have their own place, then that's what should happen." "But we're all happy here," Robert protested. "Aren't we, Pa?" Sometimes people have to make changes even when they're happy where they are, Yates said. It's part of life. The children protested throughout breakfast, but both adults remained firm. After the children left for school, Beatrice began cleaning up the kitchen, aware of Yates still sitting at the table. "Beatrice," he said finally, "can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course." "Are you leaving because you want to or because you think you should?" She kept her back to him, her hands busy with the dishes. "Does it matter?" "It does to me. I think it's best for everyone if we make a clean break now before—" She stopped herself. "Before what?" He'd stood up and she heard him move closer. "Beatrice, look at me." She turned reluctantly and found him standing just a few feet away, his dark eyes intense. "Before what?" he repeated. "Before things get more complicated than they already are," she said. "You've been generous beyond measure, but I can't continue to accept your charity indefinitely. People are talking, and it's not fair to you or the children." "Is that really why? Or is there something else?" Her resolve crumbled under his steady gaze. "What do you want me to say, Yates?" "That I'm leaving because staying is too hard. Because I've broken our agreement. Because somewhere along the way I started feeling things I shouldn't feel." His expression shifted, surprise and something else flickering across his face. "What things?" "It doesn't matter. You've been clear about not wanting more than this arrangement, and I respect that. But I can't keep living here, seeing you every day, pretending my feelings are purely professional when they're not." The silence stretched so long she thought she might die of humiliation. Then Yates spoke, his voice rough. "I told myself I'd never feel this way again. After Mary died, I thought that was it for me. One great love in a lifetime, and I'd had mine. When you showed up needing help, I swear I was just trying to do the decent thing. Give you and your kids a safe place, get some help with the house. Everyone benefits." He moved closer, and her heart hammered against her ribs. "But you made this place feel like home again," he continued. "Not just because you cook and clean, but because of who you are. Your strength, your dedication to your children, the way you never gave up even when everyone told you to. And your children, God, Beatrice, they're not a burden. They're wonderful. Michael's smart and loyal and braver than he knows. Sarah's got imagination and kindness in equal measure. Daniel's joy is infectious. Having them here, watching them with Robert, it's been a blessing. Yates, I'm not done." He reached out and gently took her hand. "When you said you were leaving, I told myself it was for the best. That you'd be better off independent, that I should let you go without making things harder. But the truth is, I don't want you to go, any of you, and not just because I need a housekeeper." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you. I fought it, tried to deny it, but it's true. I love you, Beatrice. I love your courage and your heart and the way you love your children. I love how you made this house feel whole again. And if there's any chance you feel the same way, I'm asking you not to go. I'm asking you to stay, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife." Beatrice felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Are you sure? I come with complications. 3 children, no money of my own now that I'd be bringing into the marriage, nothing to offer but myself." "You're offering me everything," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "A family, love, a future. That's not nothing, Beatrice. That's everything I thought I'd lost forever." She stepped into his arms and he held her close, his heart beating steady against her ear. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't want to, I tried not to, but I do." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his thumb wiping away her tears. "So you'll stay, you'll marry me?" "Yes." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Beatrice felt like she'd finally come home after a long, difficult journey. When the children came home from school, they found Yates and Beatrice sitting together on the porch, holding hands. The children looked at each other uncertainly until Yates called them over. "We have something to tell you," he said. "Mrs. Owens and I have decided that we'd like to make this family arrangement permanent. We're going to get married." The children erupted in cheers. Sarah threw herself at Beatrice, hugging her tight while Daniel and Robert danced around whooping. Even Michael was grinning, looking happier than she'd seen him since Thomas died. "Does this mean you'll be our pa?" Daniel asked Yates. Yates looked at Beatrice, asking silent permission, and she nodded through her tears. "If you children would like me to be. I know I can't replace your father and I wouldn't try, but I'd be honored to be a father to you all." "I'd like that," Michael said quietly, and when Yates opened his arms, the boy walked into them and let himself be held. "Group hug," Sarah announced, and they all crowded together, laughing and crying at once. They were married 2 weeks later in the same church where Reverend Thompson had planted the seed of the idea. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Beatrice wore a new dress she'd made herself from soft blue fabric that Yates had bought her in town, and Sarah had woven wildflowers into her hair. All 4 children stood with them at the altar, symbolically joining the 2 families into one. The townspeople who'd whispered and gossiped came to see the wedding, and Beatrice held her head high as she walked down the aisle. She'd done nothing to be ashamed of, and neither had Yates. They'd found each other in difficult circumstances and built something good and true. At the reception at the ranch, neighbors brought food and well wishes. Even the woman from the general store who'd told Beatrice to give up her children approached her. "I owe you an apology," she said stiffly. "I judged you harshly and I was wrong. Your children are clearly well loved and well raised, and Mr. Anderson is fortunate to have found you." "Thank you," Beatrice said graciously. "I appreciate you saying so." As the sun set, the guests departed, and the newlyweds stood together on their porch, watching the children play in the yard. Robert was teaching Michael and Daniel how to rope fence posts, while Sarah sat nearby making daisy chains. "Happy?" Yates asked, his arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again," Beatrice answered honestly. "When I came to Rock Springs, I was desperate and terrified. Everyone told me I'd made a mistake, that no one would want me with 3 children in tow. I almost believed them. I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you were stubborn enough to keep fighting for your family." He kissed her temple. "Those children are my blessing, Beatrice, every single one of them, and so are you." "I love you," she said, turning to face him. "I know I've said it before, but I don't think I can say it enough. You saved us, Yates, not just by giving us a home, but by showing us that we deserve to be wanted, all of us together." "You saved me too," he said softly. "I was just going through the motions before you came. You reminded me how to really live again." That night, after the children were finally asleep, exhausted from excitement, Beatrice and Yates lay together in their room. It felt strange and wonderful to share a bed with someone again, to have another person's warmth beside her in the darkness. "I never thought I'd have this again," Yates whispered. "A wife beside me, a house full of children. When Mary died, I thought that part of my life was over." "Do you think she'd approve?" Beatrice asked carefully. "Of us, I do. Mary was practical above all else. She'd want Robert cared for, and she'd want me to be happy. And I think she'd like you. You're both strong women who do what needs doing without complaint. I like to think Thomas would approve too. He loved the children so much. If he could see them now, healthy and happy and safe, I think he'd be grateful to you for giving them what he couldn't." They held each other in the darkness, 2 people who'd loved and lost finding unexpected joy in each other's arms. The seasons turned, and the family grew into their new life together. Michael flourished under Yates's patient guidance, learning the ranch work and slowly shedding the anger and fear he'd carried since his father's death. Sarah became inseparable from Robert, the 2 of them constantly creating elaborate games and adventures. Daniel followed Yates everywhere, chattering constantly and soaking up attention like a sponge. By summer, no one in town even remembered that they hadn't always been one family. When people spoke of the Andersons, they meant all 7 of them, and the children called Yates Pa as naturally as Robert called Beatrice Ma. One evening in August, Beatrice realized she'd missed her monthly time. At first she thought it was the stress of all the changes, but when another week passed and then another, she began to suspect. By September, there was no doubt. She was pregnant. She told Yates one night after the children were asleep, nervous about his reaction. They hadn't discussed having more children. His face lit up with pure joy. "Really? You're sure?" "As sure as I can be. I figure the baby will come in late March or early April." He pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Another blessing. How did I get so lucky?" "You're not worried. It'll be 5 children then." "So it will be. We'll manage. We always do." He kissed her soundly. "A baby, our baby. I can't wait to tell the children." The children were thrilled when they heard the news. Robert was excited to be a big brother to a baby, something he'd never gotten to experience after losing his mother and sibling in childbirth. Michael immediately started planning how he'd teach the baby to ride when it got older. Sarah couldn't stop talking about having a real live baby to help care for, and Daniel wanted to know if it would be a boy or girl, and could they please have a boy because girls were silly. As fall arrived and Beatrice's belly grew, Yates became endearingly protective. He wouldn't let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest every afternoon, and fretted over every twinge or discomfort. "You do remember that I've done this 3 times before," she teased him one day when he'd practically carried her up the porch steps. "I lost Mary this way," he said quietly. "I can't lose you too." Her heart ached for him. "Every pregnancy is different, and I'm healthy and strong. The doctor in town says everything looks good. I know, but I worry anyway." She took his face in her hands. "I'm going to be fine, and so is the baby." "You can't protect us from everything, Yates, no matter how much you want to." "I can try," he said stubbornly, and she laughed and kissed him. Winter came again, and as Beatrice grew larger, she had to let the children take over more of the household duties. Sarah proved surprisingly capable at cooking simple meals, and the boys kept the house tidy and the wood box full. Yates hired a woman from town to come help with the heavier work, which eased some of his worrying. On a cold night in early April of 1880, Beatrice's pains began. Yates immediately sent Michael racing to town for the doctor and the midwife while he settled Beatrice in their room. The other children were dispatched to stay with neighbors, though they protested leaving. The labor was long and difficult. As the hours stretched on, Beatrice could see the fear growing in Yates's eyes, though he tried to hide it. He held her hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, and murmured encouragement even as his own terror was palpable. "I'm not Mary," she gasped between contractions. "This baby is coming, and we're both going to be fine. Do you hear me, Yates Anderson? We're going to be fine." "You better be," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Because I can't do this without you. I won't." Just before dawn, with a final tremendous effort, their son came into the world with a healthy, angry cry. The midwife cleaned him up and placed him in Beatrice's arms, and the baby immediately quieted, staring up at his mother with dark eyes so like his father's. "He's perfect," Beatrice whispered, exhausted but triumphant. Yates looked down at his wife and newborn son with an expression of wonder and relief. "He is, and so are you." He kissed her forehead gently. "Thank you. Thank you for this gift, for being all right, for everything." They named him Thomas James Anderson, honoring both of their late spouses. When the other children were finally allowed to come home and meet their new brother, they crowded around the bed, awed and excited. "He's so tiny," Daniel whispered, gently touching the baby's hand. "You were that small once," Beatrice told him. "All of you were. Can I hold him?" Sarah asked, and under careful supervision, each of the older children got a turn holding baby Thomas. Michael was last, and as he cradled his new brother, Beatrice saw tears in his eyes. "Pa would have loved him," he said softly. "My first pa, I mean." "He would have," Beatrice agreed. "And I think he'd be happy knowing you have a new pa who loves you just as much." "I am happy about that," Michael said, looking at Yates. "You're a good pa to all of us." Yates had to turn away for a moment, overcome with emotion. When he turned back, his eyes were wet. "You're good children, all 5 of you. I'm proud to be your father." As spring turned to summer, life settled into a new rhythm. Baby Thomas was a content, easy baby, and everyone in the family doted on him. The older children took turns helping care for him, and even rough and tumble, Daniel was gentle and patient with his baby brother. One evening, Yates and Beatrice sat on the porch together, watching the sunset while Thomas nursed. The other children were playing a game of tag in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. "You ever think about that first day?" Beatrice asked. "When you offered me this job?" "All the time. I think about how close I came to not being in town that day. If Robert hadn't wanted to go, if we'd been 10 minutes later, I might never have met you." "I think about how close I came to giving up," she admitted. "When the storekeeper told me about that awful cabin, I almost just turned around and went back to Pennsylvania. Almost accepted that everyone was right, that I couldn't do this alone. I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you were stubborn and brave enough to keep trying." He reached over and took her free hand. "You know what the best part is? The people who said your children were a burden that no man would want, they were so wrong. Your children aren't a burden. They never were. They're bright and kind and full of potential. They've made my life richer in every way." "Our children," Beatrice corrected gently. "They're our children now, all of them." "Our children," he agreed, smiling. "And our life, our family, our future." "I love you," she said, the words feeling both familiar and new. "More than I ever thought I could love anyone again." "I love you too. You and every single one of our children. This whole beautiful, chaotic, perfect life we've built together." As the years passed, the Anderson family continued to grow and thrive. Michael grew into a strong, capable young man who eventually took over much of the ranch work, allowing Yates to focus on the horse training that he loved. He married a teacher from town when he was 22, and Beatrice cried happy tears at his wedding. Sarah inherited her mother's practical nature and her father Yates's patience, becoming a midwife and nurse who was beloved throughout the community. She married one of the young doctors who came to Rock Springs, and together they opened a proper medical practice. Daniel, ever the charmer, became a skilled horse trader and dealer, traveling throughout Wyoming but always coming home to the ranch he loved. Robert followed his father's footsteps in ranching, and when Yates began to slow down in his 50s, Robert took over the day-to-day operations seamlessly. Thomas James, the baby who had symbolized the new life Yates and Beatrice built together, grew up hearing the story of how his parents had found each other when both were lost and grieving. He became a teacher, dedicated to helping children like his older siblings had once been, kids who needed someone to believe in them. Yates and Beatrice grew old together, their love deepening with every passing year. They added 2 more children to their family over the years. A daughter named Mary, born 2 years after Thomas, and another son, Robert's twin sister, who came as a surprise when Beatrice thought she was done having babies, whom they named Grace. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were now grandchildren running around, and the house that had once felt so empty when it was just Yates and Robert was bursting with life and noise. That evening, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, Yates and Beatrice slipped away to their favorite spot on the porch. From here, they could see the land they'd worked together for so long, the home they'd built, and their family spreading out across the yard. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Beatrice asked. "When you offered me the job, I said a lot of things that day. You said my children weren't a burden, that they were good kids. No one else had said anything like that to me. Everyone else saw them as obstacles, problems to be solved, but you saw them as people, as blessings." Yates was quiet for a moment. "I saw them the way someone should have seen me and Robert. After Mary died, people looked at us with pity or discomfort. They didn't know what to do with a man and his son alone. Your children needed someone to see them as the wonderful kids they were, not as burdens. It wasn't charity, Beatrice. It was recognizing something valuable that other people were too blind to see. You saved us," she said softly. "In every way that matters." "We saved each other," he corrected. "I was drowning before you came, just going through the motions. You gave me a reason to really live again. You and all our children, you gave me back my life." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as they'd done countless times over the years, watching the sun set on another beautiful day. "No regrets?" Beatrice asked. "Not a single one," Yates answered firmly. "Every moment, good and bad, led us here. Led us to this life, this family, this love. How could I regret any of it?" "I was told no man would want me in my burden," Beatrice said, remembering those dark days when she'd felt so hopeless. "But you told me my children were blessings, and you were right. Every single one of them, and all the ones we had together, they've all been blessings, the greatest blessings of my life." "Second greatest," Yates said with a smile. "The greatest was finding you." She laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder. "We're both right. It's all been a blessing. This whole imperfect, perfect life." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Wyoming sky, they remained on the porch, two souls who'd found each other when both were lost, who'd built a family and a life from hope and determination and love. The children, they'd been told, were burdens had grown into remarkable adults, and the love they'd been told they'd never find had sustained them through 25 years of marriage. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren's laughter, the comfortable murmur of their adult children's voices, the sounds of a family together. It was everything neither of them had dared to hope for that cold November day, when a desperate widow had ridden into Rock Springs with 3 children, and nothing but determination to keep them together. Yates Anderson, the lonely cowboy who'd lost his wife and thought his heart was dead, had found love again. Beatrice Owens Anderson, the widow who'd been told she and her children were unwanted, had found a man who cherished them all. Together, they'd proven that family isn't just about blood, that love can bloom even in the harshest circumstances, and that what the world calls burdens can actually be the greatest blessings. Their story became something of a legend in Rock Springs, told and retold over the years. The widow and the cowboy who'd found each other and built something beautiful from grief and hope. Young people starting out would hear the story and take courage. Families facing hardship would remember the Andersons and keep going. But for Yates and Beatrice, it was simply their life. Their beautiful, hard-won, perfect life. The life they'd built together when everyone said it was impossible, when the odds were against them, when logic said they should give up. They'd refused to give up. They'd chosen hope over despair, love over loneliness, family over isolation. And in doing so, they'd found something more precious than gold. A home, a family, and a love that would last the rest of their days. As they finally rose to go inside where their family waited, Yates paused to kiss his wife. "Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. For taking a chance on a lonely widower and his son." "Thank you for seeing us," Beatrice replied. "For looking at my children and seeing blessings instead of burdens. That changed everything." "It did," he agreed. "It changed everything." Hand in hand, they walked into their home, into the warmth and light and love that filled every corner, surrounded by the family they'd built together. It was a home that had once been silent and sorrowful, but now rang with joy. It was a family that had once been fractured and lost, but now was whole. And it all started because one lonely cowboy had looked at a desperate widow with 3 children and said the words she'd needed so desperately to hear. "Your children aren't a burden. They're a blessing too." Those words had changed both their lives forever, leading them to this moment, this family, this love. And neither of them would have changed a single thing about the journey that brought them here, to this perfect, imperfect, beautiful life they'd created together against all odds. The end.